Hi friends, and thank you for coming back to my channel. My name is Lane, and we are going to continue on with our adventure through the Pokemon timeline today. If you've watched the other videos, which I would recommend doing, there should be a link somewhere up there, maybe? I don't know. But we have ventured through the main series, we visited the Ranger series, the Coliseum series, and now here we are with Pokemon Stadium, Stadium 2, and Battle Revolution. Now, Battle Revolution technically isn't a part of the Stadium series, but it's essentially the same thing, just with updated graphics and all that fun stuff, so I'm gonna lump it in here. So here is our existing timeline, and if you look at the very bottom, I actually updated it to put the Indigo Disc with the Scarlet and Violet. We're all educated people here. We know how DLC works. We know that technically the teal mask comes before the indigo disc, but just to make it look prettier, I'm gonna go ahead and put it in with the other part of it. So if you haven't already, like I said, like, subscribe, comment, and let's get started. So of course, like I did with the other videos in this series, I'm gonna start with a quick synopsis of what these games are. The Stadium series is a side series of the Pokemon games for the Nintendo 64 released during the Generation 1 and Generation 2, and these games are both compatible with those generations. In the games in this series, players can upload Pokemon from their Game Boy games to battle in 3D in various modes, most notably the Stadium mode, featuring various classes for trainers to beat, and the Gym Leader Castle, featuring the Gym Leaders, Elite Four members, and champion of the respective generations' games. Players who did not have any of the core series games could still rent almost all the 251 Pokemon at the time of Stadium 2 in certain modes. There are also Pokemon who can be gifted to trainers in both of these games after certain conditions are met. In Pokemon Stadium, you can be gifted the Amnesia Psyduck by registering all 151 Pokemon into the Hall of Fame, and in Pokemon Stadium 2, you can be gifted the Baton Pass Farfetch'd after beating the rival at the end of Round 1, and the Earthquake Gligar after beating the rival at the end of Round 2. Since all three of these Pokemon can be sent to the main series, it does show that these games are in fact connected to the main series. Pokemon Battle Revolution is a very similar game to the Stadium games, which is why I lumped it in here with the other ones. Pokemon Battle Revolution features 11 different Colosseums in a new area called Poketopia. Other features include stadiums that have their own special effects, such as randomizing the order of one's Pokemon. Similarly to the Stadium games, you can copy Pokemon over from the main series Generation 4 games, that being Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, Heart Gold, and Soul Silver, and then there are actually Pokemon you can transfer from this game to the main series as well, similarly to what happens in Stadium and Stadium 2. And of course, we have the special event Surf Pikachu, the Electric type Electivire, and then the Fire type Magmortar. Now, of course, beyond these games having the Pokemon that can be transferred from them to the main series, that's pretty much all the evidence that we actually have for these being valid games. Or not valid, but being real games in the Pokemon world. Or being canonical. That's what I was looking for. Now, of course, if we look at the events of the two Stadium games, we can see that both of them replicate the main series games pretty closely with their in-game events. Both of these games actually reference the events from both the Kanto and Johto games, respectively, and these are made to mirror the player's experience in those games. The gym leaders in both games are perfectly in line with what we have in the initial games, even though the Pokemon here are a bit different. In Stadium, Giovanni is still the gym leader in Round 8, and things haven't changed or been upgraded as they were in the Johto games. And then, of course, we can see that the entire Elite Four is present, which means that they've not been beaten and replaced by the ones in the Johto games, and there's also Mewtwo being present here as kind of a final boss to the games. In Stadium 2, we can see that the Kanto gym leaders have been updated to include Janine, Blue, and other new additions to complete the cast of the Johto gym leaders, and of course Koga being moved to the Elite Four position. There is also the inclusion of the Team Rocket interruption, which happens between the two same gym leaders that should canonically happen in between, that being Price and Claire. So it does seem a little redundant to say, but Stadium technically comes before Stadium 2, based off of these in-game events. So Battle Revolution is actually a special case because it doesn't reference any events or any people that we actually know of from any of the main series games. And so they have their own unique location, Poketopia, and they actually have their own unique trainers, and that one's more of a difficult one to place. But I have a theory. So what I believe here is that all three of these games were made to actually help people and prepare them and teach them how to battle, so these are actually all three simulations. Or not real life. You can transfer Pokemon to them and use Pokemon in-game from your Kanto and Johto and Sinnoh adventures. So these events need to happen for them to be simulated. That being the events of the Stadium and Stadium 2. All of those mirror the experiences, so for it to be a simulation, that data had to have been collected and already made somewhere. So that places the Stadium and Stadium 2 games after the events in Sinnoh, or that places the events of Stadium after the Kanto games and the events of Stadium 2 after the Johto games. So some people might be questioning how you can get a Pokemon from a simulation transferred over to your main series. That, of course, being the Psyduck, Farfetch'd, Gligar, Surf Pikachu, and Magmortar and Electivire. My response to that is that these Pokemon are real. So I'm not really questioning the idea that the Stadium from Stadium 1 or White City from Stadium 2 or Poketopia aren't real places in the Pokemon world, even though they do differ a lot from what we're used to as Pokemon cities. I just think that those are the places that you go to be a part of the simulation, to witness and learn, kind of like a school. Even I would love to go to school in Poketopia, though. So, and then when the milestones are completed, so when you register all the Pokemon, or when you beat the rival in round 1 and round 2, like, these Pokemon are just ready to be distributed once you get to those milestones. So, like, whoever's in charge of the simulation is gifting them out once they are completed. So, let's talk about Professor Oak. Kind of a random thought, but Professor Oak only appears naturally in the Kanto, Johto, and Sinnoh regions as part of the game, and that kind of lines up with each of these games' release, that being Stadium in Generation 1, Stadium 2 in Generation 2, and Battle Revolution in Generation 4. Coincidence? Probably, but it's still fun to speculate. So, we do need to answer a very important question here. Where did the data come for this simulation? Now, bringing back Professor Oak, he may have created something that collects data from caught Pokemon that could be used here, that being the Pokedex. So once again, Stadium games need to have been set after the completion of both the Kanto and Johto Pokedexes that happen in that game. And then since any Pokemon from Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh can appear in Battle Revolution, the game needs to be set after the completion of each of those Pokedexes. So at the bare minimum, after the events of Sinnoh. So my theory here is that all three of these are the training simulators that were made by Professor Oak. He continuously has it being upgraded with the new data that he collects, so Stadium happening first after the events of the Kanto games, and then after the Johto Pokedex is completed, Stadium 2 is released. And then after the completion of the Sinnoh Dex, they open more of a competitive battle simulator, and that's when Battle Revolution happens. However, there is one Pokemon in Stadium that kind of pokes a hole in that. And of course, that is the mythical Pokemon Mew. Now, Mew is Pokemon number 151 in the Kanto Pokedex and is only available in Pokemon games by event. So many events for Mew. So the first time that we can legitimately catch a Mew with no glitches, exploits, or with it just being a gifted event is in Pokemon Emerald during the event on Faraway Island. Now, Mew is a rental Pokemon in round 2 of Pokémon Stadium, so we do need to have some data in the Pokedex somewhere for this Pokemon to appear here. With the appearance in Emerald being its first canonical appearance and there not being much time between Kanto and Hoenn, it's possible that once the Mew was caught, the data was sent over to the Professor Oak and then used in the simulation. Now, I can hear some people pointing out that if Mew was caught in the Hoenn region, why isn't it a part of the Hoenn Pokedex? And to that, my answer is they already knew that Mew existed. They cloned Mewtwo from Mew. So in my thought, or my mind, they took Mew and used it to complete the Kanto Pokedex. And that's strictly because you can't have Mewtwo without Mew. So it was already a known Pokemon, they just didn't have the data for it yet. And speaking of Mew, the amount of legendary Pokemon that appear in these games is just baffling. So, and I know that I've discussed legendary Pokemon before and how you can't always use them as reference points because there are some who are more common, like the legendary birds, and then there are some who are more rare, like Arceus. So it's kind of touch and go. However, with the availability of these legendary Pokemon in these games, it definitely adds some credence. It makes my theory more plausible because there's no way that just by chance all of these people have these legendary Pokemon. Because there are so many trainers with them in Stadium and Stadium 2, here's a list of each legendary Pokemon and how many times that they appear under different trainers. Of course, the top row is going to be Stadium, and the bottom row will be Stadium 2. So, and then of course, Battle Revolution kind of blows everything out of the water with the amount of legendary Pokemon that appear here. So, Master Junior Joe in his Master's Battle Set 5 uses all 3 legendary beasts. Master Middle Sachet in her Master's Battle Set 6 uses a Registeel, Deoxys, and then the god of the Distortion World and Antimatter, Giratina. Then Master Senior Kruger in his Master's Battle Set 5 uses an Azelf, Regice, Latias, Zapdos, Heatran, and Regirock. Then we have the biggest offender of using legendary Pokemon, that being the Master of Masters, Mysterio. His Pokemon in no order: Cresselia, Azelf, the God of Space, Palkia, Uxie, the God of Time, Dialga, Mesprit, the creator of the world's oceans, Kyogre, the creator of the world's lands, Groudon, Latios, Lugia, the man-made Pokemon, Mewtwo, Manaphy, and Ho-Oh. So as you can see, the extent of all of these rare Pokemon are just appearing here definitely suggests that something's a little off, or that it's not real. However, like I recently stated, if whoever was in charge had received all of the information from the Pokedex, they can simulate any Pokemon that they need to, that including the legendary Pokemon that appear here. Okay, so now that we have all of that information out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the official timeline placement that I have for them. So because of all of this, I'm actually going to place Stadium after the events in Hoenn, around the same time as the first Pokemon Ranger game. So Professor Oak purchased a plot of land, he built the stadium in Kanto somewhere, and then his training simulator started. Now for Stadium 2, I'm going to say it probably had the same development time as the first one, but they did need to wait for the inclusion of that last Pokemon, since technically all of the Pokemon from Johto can be encountered in the main series, that including Celebi, who is obtainable by the GS Ball event in the main series. So because of this, I'm actually going to say that the data was collected and sent back to Professor Oak, and this simulator was completed around the events of the Sinnoh games, moving the stadium to White City. They had a baseline from the creation of that initial stadium game, and they just built onto it and added to it. Then, sometime after the events in Sinnoh, they began construction of Poketopia off the coast of Sinnoh somewhere, to continue with the inclusion of the newly discovered Pokemon. I am going to actually place the events of Battle Revolution after the events of XD though. In Pokemon XD, Gale of Darkness, there's actually a battle simulator in the game that teaches trainers certain set of skills. And I believe that the overall double battle style of Atmosphere in the Ori region inspired the double battle format used in Battle Revolution. So you guys, this was definitely more of a thinker for me. So let me know your thoughts, comments, like it, subscribe, all the fun stuff. Once again, here's our working timeline with where we are at. And yeah, the next video I'm planning on making is a little bit more of a departure, more of a side series from this overall main series. So join me for the next round, and I will see you in the next one. You guys have a great rest of your day.